Well, good evening, everyone. I trust everyone is doing well tonight. We'll go ahead and get started. And of course, we're dealing with Unit 8 this week. But let's begin by reviewing last week's work. Remember, we were in Unit 7, and we looked at employees and compared employees with independent contractors and looked at what is the criteria to define somebody as an independent contractor versus an employee. And of course, where that's important is when we're looking at how the labor laws affect the person that we're dealing with, the employee or the independent contractor. If they're employees, there are very specific things that we need to do. How we pay them, what benefits we provide to them, several things we talked about last week. Where if they're an independent contractor, we have an awful lot more flexibility. Now, the key, though, is again, who determines when the person is going to work, where they're going to work at, and what work they're going to do. And also, normally, who provides the tools or the equipment for the job. So, we spent some time looking at that. And there are certain cases where you'd want to use a contractor and other cases where you'd only want to use an employee. Then we proceeded from there to look at how we divide out employees. There are two categories basically as far as the Internal Revenue Service and the Department of Labor is concerned. One is exempt employees and the other are non-exempt. If you think of exempt employees as management, okay, they're people, they're professionals or managers, someone who is not paid on an hourly basis. So if they're not paid on an hourly basis or per piece basis, then they're exempt from the minimum wage. You don't have to pay them overtime. So a manager is paid a salary, a flat amount, and they don't get paid any extra if they have to work overtime. It's part of the job. You just do it. Same thing's true for professors, by the way. Anyhow, so we have a group of people who are paid by salary. The major restriction there is that in order to be salaried, the person must be making more than, have a pay of more than $455 a week currently. Okay. Now, if the Internal Revenue Service or the Department of Labor gets involved in evaluating the employee, they're not going to go by the employee's title. Instead, they're going to examine the kind of work the employee does. So that determines whether or not they're exempt. If they're not exempt, then we have all the laws to deal with, or a different set of laws. Mainly, they've got to be paid on an hourly basis. They have to be paid at least minimum wage. They can be paid piece rate, but if you're in a manufacturing environment where you are paying a person based on how many pieces they create during that time rather than by the hour, then the equivalent pay that you do pay them must at least equal or exceed the minimum wage. And then anyone who's working overtime beyond 40 hours a week must be paid time and a half. Okay, we looked at what a number of the laws are that an employer has to be aware of. And we broke those down into the categories you see here on slide 5. Several of them are, depend on the size of the company and how many employees they have. So some of these laws only affect companies that have a certain number of employees. Others affect everybody. So equal opportunity and discrimination laws apply to everybody. Okay? Child labor laws applies to everybody. Workplace safety and health issues applies to everybody. But some of the other requirements will depend on how many employees you have. Okay, we also looked at what happens when you're paying somebody. They see their check as their payment. They're thinking that's the money they're earning, but that's their take-home pay. From that pay, there are other things that you as the employer will be paying. So for instance, if you have health insurance, if you're providing health insurance, you may be paying all or part of their health insurance. You may be contributing to their retirement plan. You will definitely be contributing to their Social Security. We'll see that a little later in tonight's discussion. Likewise, you may be contributing or will be contributing to disability insurance. You may be contributing to group life insurance for the person. And if you're a forward-thinking company, you may even be providing educational assistance to your employees so they can improve themselves and hopefully be better employees to you. So, then we discussed how difficult it is to select the right worker. There are many criteria that go into selecting the right worker. We look at a variety of things, experience, knowledge, but one of the most important aspects that most employers will tell you that they're concerned with is the attitude of the worker. What is their attitude toward the company, toward the work they're going to do? How excited are they, I guess you'll say, and how well will they maintain that excitement level for the company? So that's the criteria that a lot of people are subjectively looking at. Okay. Now we also discussed that, and along with hiring people, we have the flip side of that when we get involved with having to let people go. Now there's a couple reasons. Obviously, if you're terminating someone for cause, which means that they're unable to perform the work to the level that's required, and or unwilling to, which is more likely the case, but that requires a lot of documentation to verify that you've dotted all the I's and you've crossed all the T's and you're being perfectly fair with the person. Okay? So you can't just come up and blindside them and say you're out. You have to go through a rigorous approach to firing somebody. Especially the bigger the corporation, the more likely you are to be evaluated on that. Now, it may be a case of downsizing where you're letting go people not because they're unable to do the work or unwilling to do the work, but because your management has not left enough work there to be done. So you're overstaffed. So you need to destaff, if you will, or have a reduction in force. Basically let people go. It's called a layoff. But the net result's the same thing. The worker B walks away with no money and no prospect of money coming in until they can find another job. So that can be a particularly difficult situation, especially if you're a small, close-knit organization and the people have been with you a long time. So that can be, like I said, a difficult situation to go through. Okay, moving on. We also talked about how to manage all the other aspects beyond employees. We have facilities. That's basically what this slide talks about. All the different kinds of facilities a company might have, depending on the nature of that company's business. We look at the warehouse and manufacturing facilities. That really relates to the fact that if you're manufacturing goods, or if you're buying goods at wholesale that you're in turn going to retail, well, you have to have a way to store those. Now, your warehouse may be the back room, or it may be your garage, as it was in the case of my father's business. It was our garage when we started. Later on, he had an actual warehouse, so it just depends. So those facilities require as much management as the personnel do. Okay? And so it really depends on whether you're into retail or wholesale, or how your business is organized. But don't forget the one in the center. The online facilities require as much management as all the other facilities, maybe even more, because the online service that you have is what's going to drive customers to your business. And so it just can't be a one-shot deal and it's over and done with and you walk away from it. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the technology section. Okay. We also looked at if you're in the business that is going to involve manufacturing, there are several steps that have to be managed in that process. So now we're talking about more than just the people, more than just the facilities. We need the workflow to be managed. And it doesn't matter if it's a small manufacturing facility or a large one. These same 8 steps are going to be gone through anytime that you're involved with manufacturing. Hand in hand with manufacturing and selling is supply chain management. Basically, supply chain is getting the product from its inception, where it is created, to the end consumer, and where your business fits into that picture. Okay? So if you're at the retail end and you're dealing directly with the customers, you have to make sure the product gets to you from the wholesaler or the manufacturer or wherever it's coming from. That means you need to schedule the shipments, and one of the buzzwords in supply chain management is just-in-time management, JIT. And basically that means that you want to schedule the inflow of product or raw materials if you're in manufacturing, so that the amount that you need arrives just as you need it, just in time. And that way you don't have to inventory a large pile of product or of raw materials and then work that pile down. The age of computers has given us great ability now to monitor that. So that's all supply chain management. Okay. We also talked briefly last week about some other factors that management needs to be concerned with. How do we prepare for the unexpected? Just because it doesn't happen with regularity, we still have to have common sense and be prepared. Obviously, we need insurance to protect our building and our assets, so that if something does happen, the insurance company will step in and pick up some of the costs so you can get restarted again. But there has to be more than just that. If your business is located in a tornado-prone area, then it would be wise to have multiple locations where part of whatever you have is in a different location. That way, if one location gets wiped out, you still have the other assets to work with. Likewise, information, data. If you have data stored off-site, then that gives you the flexibility to still have all your information so you can get up and running quickly. So it's more than just protecting the building, more than just having an insurance policy. It requires forethought. How would you handle this situation? How would you continue your business? If you want to read something really, really interesting, you might do a little research on the gentleman in San Francisco back in 1906 who started Bank of America. Okay? You might recall that in 1906, that was the big earthquake in San Francisco. Okay? And again, I'm sorry I don't remember the gentleman's name. He was an Italian gentleman. But he was out on the street corner with a table. His building had been virtually destroyed. Of course, the vault was intact, so he had his money. And he was making loans to people to rebuild almost immediately after the earthquake. Okay? Now, the good news was he was about the only bank that could do that. And he established himself as an important part of the financial infrastructure of the burgeoning San Francisco area following the 1906 earthquake. And today, Bank of America is one of the largest banks in the world. So, be aware that being prepared to continue your business in the event of a catastrophe will really be a hallmark for you. Okay, obviously, if we have any questions, make sure you get in touch with me. Let me know. I'm more than happy to spend as much time as it takes to answer any questions. So, with that, we'll go ahead and move into tonight's unit. We're going to talk about technology and legal issues. Well, technology is something that, why do we even bother? Can't we run our business without computers? Do we really need all this stuff? How did we do it before? Well, there's some reasons why we want to use technology. Okay? Obviously, if we use the right kind of technology, hopefully we can reduce our overall cost of operations, save money. By the same token, it is a world of difference to have data immediately available to you on a computer that you can go to very quickly. And as a sale is made, it pops into the system and you immediately know what your revenue is and what your expenses are related to that sale. That is a phenomenal time saver rather than having a small army of green eye-shaded bookkeepers crunching numbers on sheets of paper. And I might have related the instance where many years ago, matter of fact, back in the 70s, we already had computers then, but in the mid 70s, when I went to work for one of the federal government agencies, we had a room we called the bullpen. And basically, it was a large room with individual workstations or desks. Okay, they weren't even divided by partitions or anything. They were just desks, and each person sitting at that desk had a spreadsheet in front of them, a paper spreadsheet, and a old-fashioned calculator, and they crunched numbers manually, and they all got put onto pieces of paper, and that was how data was crunched. And we're talking 1975. We're only talking, what, 40 years ago? And computers were already a mainstay by then. So that's where the word spreadsheet comes from. It's an old multi-column paper. Normally it had about 13 columns, enough that you could have one column for each month and then a total column for the year. And so that was a 13-column spreadsheet. So anyhow, today we're able to do all this on a computer with one person, and we save time. And if we save time, we save money. And at the same time, there's much less likelihood of error because your computer system, your technology, will correct errors and do much of the manual labor, if you will, of number crunching. And so there's less likelihood that somebody's going to do the math wrong. Okay, so obviously, those three elements are what drives our move toward increasing technology today. So, what kinds of things do we use technology for in our business? Well, as this slide says, basically everything. We're concerned, if we start off in the upper right, how does the office work? Are we able to keep our data together? How quick can we get data? Marketing, they need to know who the client prospects are. How easy are they to reach? What do we talk to them about last time? What are they interested in? So we have a demand in marketing. Obviously, your retail sales, you have to know, what did you sell? And how much did you sell it for? How much money did you take in? Okay. Accounting, we need the number crunchers. That's what accounting is all about. Obviously, in manufacturing, there's a lot of information to be processed there. But really, when you start talking about servicing your customer and providing them with the quality of service that you're trying to establish, that requires information. And obviously, we talked a little bit about personnel earlier and the legal ramifications there, but you've got to have the data on hand. And finally, today we have the ability to have people working together over remote locations. And so we can do this only because of technology. So technology affects every aspect of every business, no matter how big that business is, no matter how small it is. And just as an aside, today my wife and I were in two different medical facilities. In the one medical facility, they scanned the document as soon as you walked in. You submitted your personal data online, so it was already in their computer when you got there. They scanned your insurance card, they scanned your driver's license, all that was in the computer. You walked in to see the area where the doctor was, and he's carrying the equivalent of an iPad. He has everything right there. They do an x-ray. Immediately the x-ray is uploaded to his iPad. He can see it right now. All the information is right there. From his office, we went to another older company, big company, and we saw people running around with folders of papers that were at least an inch to an inch and a half thick for each person that was there, each patient. And yes, sooner or later that gets scanned into the computer for somebody. But this was, how did when I saw all the paper, I turned to my wife and said, oh, how 1970s this is. So, technology, and that drives so much in business today. Okay, so if we're talking about technology in the computer area, and we're talking about what runs the computer, it's normally software. And especially in a small company, we have many choices as to how we're going, what software we're going to use to accomplish what. And so when we have to make that judgment to evaluate between two different kinds of software, and we go through a process similar to this for every decision we make, but we're talking about software, there are some criteria we want to look at. Obviously, how easy is this to use? If it is an extremely difficult set of software to learn to use, if it has a very steep learning curve, then it's going to be, you're going to find the employees who are responsible for using it will balk at using it, they'll drag their feet, and it'll be very error prone until you get them very comfortable with it. So if it's complicated, you're going to have much more problems. The easier it is to use, the more quickly they're going to adjust to it. By the same token, it has to be equally easy for you to manage, to know when to upgrade, to do the other things it requires to make sure that the work is being done properly. How well does that software connect to your other elements of technology? If you're using accounting information, does manufacturing have access to it? Does sales? Does marketing? Are you able to exchange the data? Will that software grow with you as your company grows? And the whole reason for going into business, everyone doesn't want to stay small with just 2 employees. They want to grow the business and make more money, okay, and have a bigger footprint, if you will. Well, it'd be nice if the software that you're buying can grow with you, if you don't have to throw it all out when you get to the next size and buy a bigger system. Okay. And then how easy is it to move from place to place? Again, that's going to depend what kind of vendor support you have. But notice the last item, and notice that it's not bold struck like the other items are. The other items are really important, okay? But the most important item here is the cost, okay? Because if you go for the lowest cost product, in all likelihood, you're not going to get the product you want. If you try cutting corners and go the cheapest way possible, especially when it comes to technology, in all likelihood, that low-cost item will not do all the other things that you need done. So that's why it's important to evaluate the other things. If it costs you a little bit more, but the software does all the other things you're going to need done, then it's a buy. It's a bargain and a buy. Okay? But if it's the absolute cheapest thing, but it won't do half of the things you need done, it's not worth the paper that it would take to write the order on. So cost is an element, but notice it is the least important of the elements. And an old adage that I learned in sales is basically you get what you pay for. If you buy the cheapest thing, you get the cheapest thing. If you're willing to pay a little bit more money to get quality, then you can get quality. Okay, now how do we create this technology bubble, if you will, that we're going to work within? Well, we got a couple ways. One, you can do it on your own. Okay, you can hire the experts, if you will, the computer savvy people. Have them create the software for you. You can buy the hardware and have it installed in your facility, and you can be in control of the whole thing. Okay? That's always one option. Another option is to have the services, in other words, have access to all the good things, if you will, the service of the software that you're looking for, but not have to bear the cost individually of the workers to put it together, the creators, the designers, and the people who maintain it. Share that cost with a wider group of users, which is what happens when you're working in the cloud. In the cloud, it's basically an internet-based system. It may or may not be open to the public. It may be an internal, internet access only to your company and to the other users of that. So it's obviously not something the public can get to. However, it lets you store all the information off-site in a secure way, and in most cases you have access to that information from a wide number of instruments, whether it's the iPad, whether it's a laptop, whether it's desktop, whatever, smartphone. So that is a way to handle things. And there are many versions in between, if you will. What's an in-between one? An in-between one might be a local service provider who has the computer and equipment in their facility, and they farm out to you the service. They put a link there that you can get into their system and use it. It's not really in what we think of as the cloud, where it's worldwide, but you have access to it. Okay, so that's an in-between level. So it's valuable to you. You have less control over the software, but you have more control over the information, even though somebody else is keeping it for you. Okay? So the problem with having your own hardware, so you install your own computer system and you hire a couple computer whizzes to run it for you. Now you've got the overhead of those computer whizzes, the employees. You're 24/7, 365. So you've got them every day, all year long, okay, day and night. And so if one of them gets sick and you have them out on medical leave, you've got to find someone to replace them or fill in for a while. It starts to be a headache. Okay. Likewise, the computer equipment, we know how quickly computer equipment goes obsolete. Here you go, you install a complete system, and believe it or not, within 6 months that system, a new system has already come out that has more whiz-bang horsepower. So how quick do you upgrade? It's like one of the doctor's offices we were in recently, the people had a Windows XP on their screen. So they were using Windows XP. What is that? 6 versions ago of Windows? Yes, it's doing the job for them, but there's been a lot of technological improvements since then. So if it's in the cloud and you're just using the service, then the cloud vendor is going to upgrade their equipment as appropriate. So continuing with that thought, regardless of whether you have all the equipment on site and all the technicians on site, or you're using the cloud, you still have to be concerned with data security. Okay? You don't want anybody having access to your information other than your trusted employees. Okay? You don't want anyone just walking through your office and say they're visiting there for some reason. It's a potential vendor who wants to sell you something, or it's a potential customer, and you don't want them walking by an unattended computer screen that has raw data, or has your data on it. Okay, so there has to be a way when a person gets up from their computer that their screens go blank, or that they have some requirement to not just get up and walk away. A lot of places will have glare screens or glare shields go over their computer screen, so only a person sitting directly in front of the screen can see what's on it. So nobody at an angle can see. Okay, it's a polarized screen that goes over top of your regular screen. So you have to be concerned about that kind of security, because otherwise somebody can get access to your information. In addition to that kind of security, you also have to be prepared to deal with hackers breaking into your system if it's your system, if you're the only one there. Okay, or it's you own the whole ball of wax. Where the cloud-based system, there are specialists who are watching for that eventuality of hackers breaking in. Okay. So, what are some important technology policies, very similar to what I was alluding to a few minutes ago, that you need to be concerned with? Well, obviously, security of your data, that's really, really important. How private is the information you keep? You don't want anyone getting access to your customers' data, to any information relating to your customers. By the same token, you don't want anyone getting information about your employees either, or about the company. So you may need to have a set of email policies. Okay, what happens when your employee is using your company email system? Do you want them sending out private emails through your company system? Do you want them receiving private emails through your company system? Probably not. What about web surfing policies? Well, most companies would say that we sure don't want our employees sitting there instead of working, going to some websites. And so you need to establish the policy so that your employees know that even on their time, even if it's on lunch break, they're not supposed to be using the company equipment and web browser in order to go do personal things. Okay, and likewise personal use policies. Okay, so information and data. Critical area. So here we are, we've invested an awful lot of money and time and effort into our technology system, whether it's wholly owned internal or whether it's on the cloud-based. We'll have a tremendous amount of information, and many of you have probably already experienced this. Think for a minute of your hard drive and all the different files you have on it. Now, it's one thing if you're a student and this is your first class and you have the assignments from this class, you have your answers to the assignment questions, you probably have a file with your discussion thread comments that you write them on a Word document and then you paste them into the discussion thread. You probably have some copies of files that you have used in your research. So if you look at your computer files, you probably have a lot. If you were to talk to a faculty member, you'd be shocked at how many files they have, especially if they teach more than one class. Okay? Because every paper you've turned into me, I've got on my computer somewhere. Unless I've teased them out or cleaned out my file boxes. And it's kind of like the classic picture of a file cabinet or a person's desk that just has papers piled up all over their desk. Well, your desktop might look like that. Okay? The trouble is, if that's the way your desktop looks on your computer, it's just file after file after file, and you're running a business, how do you find the information you absolutely need? Okay? Obviously, you got it collected, so you have to have a way to find it. So you have to organize it just like you organized the file folders of all that junk paper that was sitting on your desk back in the dark ages, and you put it in file cabinet drawers organized in a certain way. You need to do the same thing with your data that you're keeping on computer, so you can have a way to go find them. Okay? Once you've found it, you have to know what to do with this information. Okay? So you have to have a good way of analyzing it. You may be using some statistical packages to determine what is the trend in your sales, what is your average revenue per sale. There's a lot of mathematical steps you can go through to analyze your data, but you have to have some knowledge of how to do that. Now we're talking about some basic math, some basic statistics, some market information, taken a marketing course so you know how to analyze marketing data, accounting data. You need to know a little bit about accounting so you know how to analyze the accounting information. Okay? And then finally, once you've analyzed it, you have to understand what it means. It's not enough to take a spreadsheet and run a multiple regression analysis using Excel, Microsoft Excel, which you can do. But when you get some numbers that says R equals or R squared equals and gives you a value, you have to know what that means. That means you have to know a little bit about statistics, and you have to know about the innate understanding of your customers and the product and how it's used and the other aspects of your business so you know what those numbers mean. So to understand the information. So there's a lot that goes into this. It's not just a number. Okay. Well, let's change topics for a few minutes. Okay. And let me stop here. There's some people you just don't want to have to talk to. So obviously the judge is one of them. Okay? So let's talk about how we organize companies and businesses at different levels. Let's talk a little bit about who is liable for what. Let's talk about the impact of some taxation. Okay? And who owns what. Okay. So, the easiest way to start a business is to be a sole proprietor. A sole proprietor means basically you're the man. You're the man or you're the lady. Okay? The business is yours. You own it. You make the decisions. There is nobody else. That's a sole proprietorship. Now, in many states, if you're going to operate a sole proprietorship, you have to do it under your own name. So it would be John Smith. Okay, that would be the name of the company. However, you can also have what we call doing business as. So it might be John Smith doing business as, Eloquent Parties Inc., or Eloquent Parties Company, or Eloquent Parties, whatever. But you're doing business as. So you have a company name that relates back to the sole proprietor. But it's DBA, it's doing business as. Okay? Now, in the case of a sole proprietorship, if you're the only owner, you own the business, you make all the money, you're responsible for all the bills. But the thing is, you are personally responsible. It is not something where, let's say you go to the bank, you need to expand your business, okay? And you borrow money to buy a new machine, okay? The bank loans you the money, okay? The bank is going to require you to put up collateral to justify that loan. Just prove that you can repay it. And if you don't repay it, they'll take that collateral and sell it to recoup their money. So they may require you to mortgage your house. In other words, if you own your house, they may say, okay, we want the house as collateral, so we're sure you'll pay us off. Or you buy a vehicle, and the vehicle is in the name of the bank because that is the collateral. If anything happens, you don't pay off the vehicle, they take the vehicle and they sell it. Okay? So as the sole proprietor, your personal assets are at risk for the business. There is no separation between your personal assets and the business assets. Okay? So therefore, if the business, you get a loan for the business, but you might lose your house if the business goes under. Okay? So sole proprietorship, you're fully responsible. But by the same token, you get to make all the decisions. Okay? Now, moving up one step, we have what's called a general partnership. A general partnership is two or more people doing business together, where they each are equal owners of the company or have some stated share of the company, and they're each, as general partners, able to make decisions about the company. Each, as general partners, are able to commit the company to various contractual arrangements. All it has to be is they be a partner in the company. Okay? So, for instance, you could have a partner, and that partner might decide to go get a loan for that related to that business without telling you. Okay? They can do that. That's legal. They get the loan, but because you are one of the partners of the company, you are financially responsible for that loan just as they are. And if they renege and are not able to meet the payments, and the business isn't able to meet the payments, guess who the bank is coming after? They're coming after you, the person with the money. Okay, so do the partners have to be equal? No, you could have a 1/3 partner and the other person be 2/3 owner of the company. All that means is how you're going to split the profits between you. Okay, but you could have more than one partner. You could have a number of partners. Okay, 2, 3, 4 partners. Okay, now there is another kind of partnership called a limited partnership. Basically, what a limited partnership is, it is a legal agreement which relieves some of the partners of the financial responsibilities. Okay? So each person is only responsible for up to the most of what the share they put into the business. So if you have a person who's 1/3 owner and somebody else is 2/3 owner, okay, the person who's 1/3 owner, if the business goes belly up, is only responsible for 1/3 of the debt. That's basically, in a simplest form, what a limited partnership is. Okay. Now, another phrase for that is limited liability partnership. Okay, they're similar. If you look up the technical definitions in your textbook, you'll find there are a couple little tweaks to them, but in general, they're very similar. It's a way to limit your liability so that each person is not responsible for all the debts. Now, the LLC is a limited liability company. That's a little different than a partnership. Okay? And again, it's one way to get the owner of the company not to be responsible for all of the debt. Now, the hang up with that, yes, you can establish this in a legal way. You create the documents. Okay? However, when you go to the bank for a loan, the bank may say, that's all fine and Jim Dandy, but we want you to personally sign. If you personally sign, that means you accept personal responsibility, and now your personal assets are at risk to repay the debts of the company. So the limited liability company or limited liability partnership is only as good as you don't commit to personally signing for these things. And of course, many banks say if you don't personally sign, we're not giving you the loan. Okay, now we have the standard C Corp. When I say standard, most times when you think of a corporation, you're thinking of a C Corp. Okay, what is a corporation? A corporation is an organization. It is an artificial person created by law. Okay? So there was a law created that said we can form an artificial person, which we will call a corporation. This corporation, as an artificial person, will be able to make legal agreements itself. It will be responsible for its own debts. The owners of the company will not be responsible for the debts, only the company itself, which in this case is a corporation. It can have many, many, many shareholders. Okay. The shareholders will vote a board of directors in. The board of directors is responsible for running the company. They will hire the officers, the president, the chief executive officer, chief finance officer, and on down the line. So normally, if you think of any major corporation in the country today, they're going to be C Corps. Now, one thing that's interesting, if we go back up to the partnership, to the sole proprietorship. Let's go talk about it for a second. You get to the end of the year, you take all the revenue you've taken in, you take all the legal expenses that you have, you subtract the expenses from the revenue, what's left over is your profit. That profit is taxed to the owner on their personal income tax statement, period. And then you pay your income taxes on that, and the rest left over is your money, whether you took it out of the organization or out of the company or not. So let's say you get to the end of the year, you've already taken a salary out, a draw, if you will, and so that was the money you were spending to live on. But at the end of the year, there's another $100,000 of profit. Okay, when you total up your taxes for the year, you take all the money you took out of the company as a draw, plus the $100,000 profit that was left over at the end of the year. Now you pay your income taxes on that, okay? And then what's left over is yours. Or you can leave it in the company to grow the company, whatever you want to do, okay? However, you paid taxes on the whole thing. Same thing is true for the general partnership or limited partnership, either one. The percentage of profit that is applicable to each person. So if you have one person who's 1/3 owner, another person who's 2/3 owner, the one who's 2/3 owner gets 2/3 of the profit. The one who's 1/3 owner gets 1/3 of the profit, but they pay their income taxes on their personal income taxes. The company does not pay any income tax. Okay? It's only the individual owners that pay income tax. Now we get down to the C Corp. C Corp has shareholders. Okay? The C Corp is a artificial person, a legal entity by itself. It has to pay income tax on the profit left over at the end of the year before any of that profit is distributed to the shareholders as dividends. So we get to the end of the year, we add up all the expenses the corporation has, we take all the revenue that the corporation has taken in, we subtract the expenses from the revenue. What's left over, we pay our income taxes on. The income taxes can be as high as 35%. It could be as low as 15% on a corporate. This is federal, by the way. Now, what money is left over, now the corporation may or may not distribute some of that money to its shareholders. Each shareholder would get a proportional amount in terms of the number of shares it owns. So if you own 100 shares and there's 1,000 shares outstanding, then you get 10% of the profits, okay? After the corporation has paid taxes on it. Now, you receive your 10% as dividends. Guess what? You have to pay taxes on that 10% on your personal income tax. So the money that the profit that the corporation made got taxed, and then when it was distributed to the shareholders, it gets taxed again. That's double taxation. But that's exactly how corporate taxes are done. Okay, so we had a certain amount of money. It got taxed by the corporate when the corporation paid taxes on it. What was left, the person paid taxes on. Now we go to a S Corp. An S Corp is a corporation that is run as a sole proprietorship, or a limited partnership, either way. Okay, there are very few shareholders. Okay, and normally it's a single shareholder. Okay, sets up an S Corp. In my case, both my wife and I are shareholders of the company. But at the end of the year, the S Corp does not pay income tax itself, even though it's a corporation. Instead, just like a sole proprietorship, that profit goes to the person's income and they pay income tax on it at their personal rate. So that's the reason for an S Corp. Now, if you have an LLC is the same thing. It's a limited liability company, not corporation, company. It's like a sole proprietorship. The owners in that, the owner of that LLC will pay the taxes on the company by themselves. Okay? The only one that has double taxation is the C Corp. Now, I would ask, have you ever heard of a B Corporation? A B Corporation is a relatively new animal. Now understand, a C Corporation and all these other businesses are in business to make profit. That's what they're there for. Okay? A C Corp in particular, this is the C Corporation. Let me back up a minute. The C Corporation that we're talking about, their managers are responsible to the shareholders in order to make sure that they're making the most profit or most return for their shareholders they can make. If they do something, let's say, philanthropic, where they give the money away, to some charity, that may not be in the best interest of the shareholders, and the shareholders may sue the managers or fire the managers for doing that. Okay. Looking back at a C corporation, there was a question asked about why would anyone want to have a C corp. The reason that we have a C corporation, because as a separate legal entity, the corporation is responsible for its own debts. Now what that means is if the corporation takes out a bank loan and the corporation ends up going out of business, the shareholders are not responsible to go into their personal assets to pay off that debt. The only thing a shareholder can ever lose in a C corporation is the money they invested to buy their shares of stock. That's the only thing they can lose. Nobody can come after them in order to get them to repay the debts of the corporation, because the corporation is a separate entity. That's why we have corporations. It's the only reason. Okay? But the downside of that is we have that double taxation. Okay, continuing. I mentioned the S Corp. What is this thing called a B Corp? Well, if C corporations are the managers and officers of a C Corp are responsible to the shareholders to make money, okay, a B corporation is what's called a benevolent organization. This is a corporation in business to make a profit. However, part of its charter, if you will, or the foundation of the papers they put together to start the B Corp, indicates that the corporation will do good things with its money. Benevolent. It will do philanthropic things with some of its money. In other words, it will donate money where it feels appropriate. Okay? It is a way for corporations to take some social responsibility, but leave the managers and officers and the president and vice president and what have you of the corporation not be liable to the shareholders if they make decisions related to donating part of the revenue of the company, part of the profit of the company. It's like the Tom's Shoes company we saw before, where the company, for every pair of shoes it sells, it donates another pair of shoes. Well, donating that pair of shoes to some poor kids cost money. If it were a C Corp, then the shareholders of that corporation could come back to the gentleman who started Tom's Shoes and said, wait a minute, you're using our money for that. We don't want our money done that way. We're going to fire you. You're no longer going to be president of this company. And so it depends on how many shares of stock are voted against that person, because it's an election in effect. Everybody who has a share of stock gets to vote. Okay? And they can vote yes or no. So in that case, there could be a serious, I guess you would say, problem in a company that wants to be benevolent and do good things, okay, and their shareholders don't want them to. So to get around that, the benevolent corporation, or B Corp, has the legal paperwork that indicates that the management of that company is committed to fiscal responsibility and to social responsibility. So the company, part of its charter says we're going to invest in socially responsible actions. So we'll donate money. Now, a couple other things you'd probably want to be aware of. We have 501c3 corporation. Now, what is that? That is a charity organization. It is non-profit. It's not designed to make a profit. Some students who are looking at starting a company have indicated that their company is going to help people, okay, and not charge the people for the service. Okay, those would be 501c corps. Okay, basically what they would be doing would be requesting donations of money in order to carry out their operations. Okay, so they can make money, but they cannot have a profit. All their money must be used, and so the owners never get a share of the profit because there ain't no profit. Simple as that. That's what a 501c3 is by definition. Okay, now as you're continuing on, I kind of like this idea because if you're thinking about taking in a partner, okay, then you have to be concerned about the advantages of having a partner and the disadvantages. So, to be a partnership or not to be a partnership, that is the question. Okay? I pointed out some of those problems. You do want to look into the details before you commit to it. Uh, Another thing you want to be concerned about in any company is if you have intellectual property, especially if you're in the software business or you write music or you create anything that is written. You want to be careful talking to other people about it. You want to copyright it where appropriate, patent it if that's appropriate, and trademark it otherwise. Okay? So that you can use that information and other people cannot steal it from you. Okay. We talked earlier in the course about non-disclosure agreements. Basically, a non-disclosure agreement says if you tell someone about your company and they sign the agreement, they will not tell anyone else about it. A non-compete agreement is a little different situation. That's where you have normally an employee or a partner or somebody that, a consultant or someone that's working with your company, and you get them to sign an agreement that says they will not go into business directly in competition to you for some period of time after they leave you. This is quite often the case in businesses where they're hiring high-level executives and they say you cannot go to work for a competitor and you cannot start a competing company for 5 years after you leave us. Something like that. Okay? And again, the details are obviously subject to whatever arrangements you want, but you put that into a legal contract, both parties sign it, now you have legal recourse if they break that agreement. Okay. Oftentimes, depending on the nature of the business, you may be required to submit bids for work if you're bidding on a job, and you may be required to have a contract signed with the person buying your product or your service. Okay. Oftentimes this relates to service. So there's certain things you want to make sure are in that contract. Okay. And that way both parties are protected. You're protected and you're going to get paid, and the other party is protected. They're going to get the service that they are contracting for. Okay? There are licenses that are required. Most states require every business in their state to be licensed. Oftentimes cities require licenses too, or what they call a business permit. So be aware if your particular locality business requires it and what your state licensing requirements are for your particular kind of business. Taxes. Taxes are a bugaboo that everyone has to deal with. Death and taxes, the only thing you can be sure of. Talk for a moment about federal taxes. Somewhere between 15 and 35% for corporations. Okay. And again, that's strictly IRS. Okay. Now, states have corporate taxes too. This again is for C Corps. Okay. So each state is a little different. So it depends on what state you're in, whether you're going to be doing business in that state, doing business in other states, and are you going to have facilities in those other states. So much of that will determine how you have to pay state taxes. Okay. Now, in the payroll area, obviously, if you have an employee, you have to hold a certain amount of money out of their income. So you're paying them, let's say, $100 a week. You have to keep out a certain amount of that $100 to pay their federal withholding taxes. That's money that you're going to have to send to the federal government every 3 months for all your employees. And that's getting money into the federal coffers so that the person at the end of the year already has money in the IRS so that they start paying their taxes that way. Okay, so it comes the end of the year and they haven't spent all their money and they can't pay their taxes. So that's withholding. That's federal. Okay, Social Security. Right now, every employee in the United States, no matter their level, management or whatever, has to pay into Social Security. They pay 6.2% of their income up to $117,000. Now the kicker is that you, as the owner of the company that hired them, have to match that and send another 6.2% of their income out of your pocket to match their total contribution. So each person ends up with 12.4% of their pay going into the Social Security system, but they're paying 6.2% of that, and you're paying the other 6.2%. Okay. Continuing, what about Medicare? Medicare is a special tax for the elderly that are on Medicare, but everyone has to pay it anyhow. So what happens is people, the employees, will take 1.45% of their pay, which you have to withhold, and send for Medicare. You have to match that, and out of your own pocket, send another 1.45% of their pay, and you have to keep doing that up till a certain level, up to $200,000. So once the employee has made $200,000 and in pay, and you've contributed your 1.45% of that, and they've contributed their 1.45% of that, from then on, no matter how much they make, they have to contribute 0.9%. You don't have to contribute anything for people making over $200,000 a year. Now, you're not going to have a lot of employees in that category unless you're a really, really big corporation. What about state withholding taxes? Again, for the person, you have state withholding taxes if they have a state income tax, very similar to the federal, and each state will tell you specifically what you have to withhold for them. Likewise, many states have unemployment insurance. This is where when somebody loses their job, they go on unemployment. Well, where the money comes from is from businesses paying a certain percentage into unemployment insurance for each worker they have. It doesn't come out of the worker's paycheck. It comes out of your side. Okay? And so that's where the money comes from to fund this whole unemployment system. Okay? Also, under certain conditions, you would have disability insurance. What happens if the employee is injured on work and is going to be out on medical for some length of time? Then you have long-term disability insurance. And again, you're responsible for that because there has to be some way to pay them to keep them alive, so you pay the insurance to do that. Okay, and then we're all, well, I shouldn't say all of us, many states are familiar with sales tax. If you have a retail sales outlet, every time you sell something, you collect a certain amount of tax and you send that off to the state. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know. And what do we have to do this week? Well, we got chapters 15 and 16. Your discussion question this week should be interesting. We're going to talk about hotels. If you can remember the movie Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeves, it was filmed at this particular hotel. This is the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island, a very elegant place. But that's just the pictures I chose to put up. The questions are how relate to customer service and technology and how hotels should adjust to that. Your assignment for this week is not really an assignment. Okay, it's not really due this week, I should say. Your Unit 8 assignment is your final project, part of it, part 1 of it, and it's going to be due in Unit 9. So you work on it this week, but you don't have to submit it this coming Tuesday. It gets submitted the following Tuesday in the end of week 9, and you'll have this part and you'll have the other part that we'll do next week. So you should have been working on this project all along for the whole term, and so each week you had some things to do toward your final project. All that should go into this final report. Make it look good. And remember, even whether I put a lot of comments back on it or not to you, the key is it is your blueprint for how you're going to go about putting together your business or planning the next steps of your business. Okay, so the final project, just what we just talked about. Okay, you know how to contact me. Nothing has changed there. And with that, I should see you this week in the discussions, and I should see you next week in the seminars. Thank you so much for attending. With that,